right, so tonight we've got food, and then we've got a couple of talks. The order of this talks have changed a bit. I'll go over that in a sec, and then afterwards we'll have some announcements where you can talk about something you're working on, or if you're hiring. So first up, we're actually going to have the second speaker, Baz. He's going to talk a little bit about full-stack TypeScript and getting up and going from scratch. And then we'll have a break, and then we're going to have David. He's going to come in and talk a little bit about Redux-saga, and then later on we're going to talk about React hooks with Chris. All right, so give it up for Baz.
I'm good. No, it's fine. Bump up the font so that everybody can see me, although I won't be in the terminal for long. How many people here use TypeScript? Raise your hands, please. Oh. So yeah, so it's around 50% of the room, so it's pretty well used now. How many people here use React actually, out of curiosity? Okay, that's pretty much everyone here. How many people use TypeScript and React together? Okay, so that's a interestingly smaller percentage. But yeah, so this talk is going to be about setting up a TypeScript React project, and then we'll add some backend code to that as well. The whole objective is that you can have your front-end code as well as your backend code in a single project and use a single TypeScript config to do error checks on the full code base. We'll start off. Oh, yeah? So I was hoping that I'd get internet, but right now it's just my phone's decided to not connect. But fortunately, I have over here a backup folder. Come on. Search backup. Yeah, that is not what I thought it was. This is turning out to be a horrible experience. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my node modules. Yeah, call it copy, because why not? Why rename files when you don't have to? So I'm going to just copy my node modules just so that I don't have to run npm installs, because I do not have internet. But everything else in the demo folder I will delete. I'll just leave node_modules in there. So we start off with an empty folder. You saw me delete everything under there other than node_modules. The first thing that you do in any project, in any node or UI project, is npm init, create a package.json. You can do it 100 ways. I'll just do that. It's gone ahead and created a simple package.json over here for me. In the output folder, let's go into the demo folder. Init it, done. We got a package.json. Interestingly, it picked up the things that are in node_modules in progress. Not really interested in cleaning that up a bit. But to create a UI project, you need Webpack and stuff around Webpack. That would be Webpack, Webpack CLI, and Webpack Dev Server. And to use TypeScript with Webpack, what you need is the TypeScript compiler, of course, which is just TypeScript along with TS Loader. Once you install all of these things, because I'm going to, this is the command. I could run this, but since I do not have internet, I've copied over the node_modules, and that's fine. And once you run this, you'd get tsc on your terminal within the project, so you can run npx tsc-init. If the folder is copied over, which it is, I can at least do that. And we get a new tsconfig file created by TypeScript. There's not much to do in a tsconfig file that TypeScript creates by default to enable React for it. All that you have to do is switch on JSX support, point it to React. And because I'm going to be creating all the files in the source folder, I'll just add an include and point it to the source folder. Cool. And I'm going to create 2 targets, one for building the final assets that you can deploy to CDN, for example, S3 or something, CloudFront, something like that. And then while you're developing, you won't actually write the files to this. You'll use Webpack Dev Server to serve them locally. To do that, I'll just create 2 scripts within my package.json. One is a build one is a start one. Now, in order for Webpack to work, of course, you need a Webpack config.js. Nothing magical here. Create a new file, webpack.config.js. Now, if you use Webpack, stuff till here is what you'd need anyways. Like, this is just plain Webpack config. You specify your entry point and you specify an output path. But because you're using TypeScript, you also tell Webpack that support TS and TSX files. And for these TS and TSX files, use TS loader. If you have any questions, maybe shout it out. How about that? Should have moved it down a bit. It's okay. Yeah, so within our Webpack config, we have the public folder that the output will be generated to. We'll create an index.html over here, so I'll just create a public folder. And within that, I'll create an index.html, which will be the main application entry point. I'll just create HTML body div with the ID of root. And I'll also go ahead and create a script tag, which instead of writing, I'll just copy paste because save time. Nothing magical about that. So this build bundle.js is what will be generated by Webpack, as you can see over here. The next thing that you have to do is, of course, create the application entry point. We saw that over here, source app.tsx. Let's go and do that. Source, source is not there, source app or app.tsx. Within that, we can write whatever the hell we want. Let's just do document.write. Hello world. And now if everything is set up correctly, we should be able to, based on our package.json, we have our start target, which is going to start Webpack Dev Server and start serving up the public folder. Let's do that. And it's saying that it's serving it up at localhost 8080. We can open that up over here. Cool. And this is what we did in document.write over there within our application entry point. Now, at this point, this isn't a React application. This is just a basic Webpack UI application. If you want to use TypeScript and React together, all that you need to do is run npm install react, React DOM, and the types for React and React DOM. For those that are curious, I can show a screenshot of what that npm install would look like. Nothing special over there. I've already installed that because I just copied the node_modules folder. But now we can go into our application and start writing some Reacts into our TypeScript's code base. So import React from React, React DOM, and then we just use React DOM to render a simple div hello people to the within our index.html. If you might remember, we had a div called root. Cool. I'm just gonna render that out. So once this is saved, you should see hello people in the UI. So that's just setting up from scratch React TypeScript UI application. Now let's talk about full stack TypeScript. What you'll need is some server code. Let's write some server code. Let's go ahead and within the source folder create a server over server TS file. It didn't show up on the file tree at the left. VS Code was lagging. That's fine. But in order to use Node from TypeScript, you need the type definitions for Node. You would do npm I at types/node. I already have that. That means I can already bring in something like HTTP from the Node's native HTTP module, and I can go ahead and create a server if I wanted to. So I'll just go ahead and create a server. The server takes a single function, which is the request and the response, and within the function body, I'll just go ahead and write hello and just end the response after that. And I'll listen on some port. 3000 will be fine. Now, at this point, I haven't set up any of the building of the server-side code base. I've only done building and live development of the front-end code. So let's modify our package.json. I've completely gone off script, by the way, but I think that will be fine. We'll modify our existing start and build to be the front-end ones. And I will jump back to the script. And create 2 more start and build for the backend right in my package.json. And before I actually, just to complete out all the scripts, what I'll do is I'll also create a build for running both the backend build and the front-end build, which will be just npm run build front-end build backend, which I'll just copy because it's faster to copy than to type that. And then I'll also create a start for both of them, which will use concurrently, which is another thing that you would install, npm I concurrently. That allows you to run multiple scripts, literally any command that you can run on the terminal or command prompt simultaneously. That's concurrently. But I will copy the full thing from here because that's faster. Cool. All that's doing is concurrently running start backend and start frontend. Now let's look at the build backend and the start backend. So for building the backend, all that we're doing is we're running the TypeScript compiler TSC that we've run previously to initialize the TS config as well, and telling it that use the project for the TS config for the project. Having a separate TS config for the backend allows you to target, like for example, ES6 or ES7 if you want to for new versions of Node. Plus, it gives you more flexibility of having a separate config for the UI and a separate config for the backend, just in terms of building. We'll do that. We'll just, instead of wasting time, I'll just go into the tsconfig.server.json and just paste that in. tsconfig.server.json, paste that in. All that is TypeScript, take up everything from the existing tsconfig file, but remember that the source folder is the root, and take all the TS files and build them into the lib directory, that's outdir, and exclude everything for the front end, that is source app. That's all that's written over here. And if you now jump to our package.json, you can see that that's all we're doing, just TypeScript build using this config. So if I actually go ahead and run build right now for the backend, you should see that everything in the server will get built into the lib folder. So you get the generated JavaScript over here for the server file that we created. Now that's for like deployment. So for deployment, you would probably publish this lib folder to your Node.js server out there. For the front end, you'd publish the public folder. So right now you don't see the build asset over here. If you want to build the build assets over there, you just do npm run build front end. Just runs webpack. Nothing fancy there. VS Code. Why not? Ooh, not showing up. Ran from the wrong directory or something. Don't care that much. But just run webpack and you get the build assets. That's the focus. wanted to run the backend code for live development, I have a target over here within tsconfig. Within package.json, the script's target. I have a start for backend, which runs another package that you would install, which is ts.node.dev, which does live compiling of the TS files into JS and then runs them through Node. So for development, take TS and run it through Node, so ts.node.dev. If I just run that npm run start backend, this is our server entry point, by the way, which just goes ahead and listens on 3000 and writes that. So if you go to go localhost 3000, you should get the hello that we wrote over here. If you modify this, so the question is, does it correctly pick up tsconfig? You can set up the tsconfig path, and that would specify a particular one. But in this example, I'm just letting it pick up the root tsconfig. It's not using tsconfig server.json. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, so we have a live backend development workflow working as well. So if I just run npm start, which just runs concurrently the backend as well as the front end, you should be able to do live development on the front end as well as the back end. And in order to do that, I'll actually get Mal, a colleague who works with me, to come up. And he's going to write some code that he's going to use both in the front end as well as the back end. So I'll stick with the mic. So he's going to create a new file called, it's up to him, pmal.ts, that's his name. And within that file, he's going to export a function. Yeah, again his name. And then he's going to return a string. Literally the string. And then he's going to jump into either the front end or the back end. Let's see what he picks. This is so exciting. He picked the front end. Within the front end, he's going to use the code from the common folder and invoke a function by his name. And now, since that function returns string, if he jumps to Chrome on my machine, it is rendering the string. And now he's going to share that code in the backend as well. He'll just console log it. The function Pimal, which is his name, which it did not import, but it came through, and he's calling it. So now you can see on the terminal that it's logging out the string. Cool. Thank you, Pimal. Are there any questions? Yep. So this all the code that you've seen over here is already in a repo. Yeah, so yeah, that's exactly what I would do. So that's exactly. So the question I believe, let me paraphrase for you. So over here you've gone through the step by step on everything that you would require. When I could have just gone to git clone, React, TypeScript, and I would have done npm start, and I would have been good to go. That would work, but to show all the configs, that's the objective here. I would never do this in, oh, I'm going to set up a project today. Talk to you after 15 minutes. Question? So the question is, am I aware of any TypeScript minifiers? No, so for the front end, you just use webpack build. So in the package.json, you saw that I'm passing in for building the front end, I'm passing in webpack -b, which is the production flag. So it'll automatically uglify the hell out of it if I had generated it. And so it goes from TS to JS, and then the JS gets minified. Nothing TypeScript specific required. You could do better by utilizing the type information to to do even further minification. Yes, but that's not been done by anyone yet. Any other questions? Yep. So the question is the output file, if I write just function pamal dot ts in ts, is there a size difference between that file and the JS file? The answer will depend. Depends if the thing that you are doing is supported by the runtime. So here I have a simple function that Pamal created that does absolutely nothing special, that will run pretty much anywhere JavaScript would run. So if I were to run just build, which will run both the front end and the back end build, I should get a corresponding JS file in the output folder. And there is a slight difference here. This is the JS that you'd actually write for it to function node. The extras thing over here is because of npm compatibility. You can actually get rid of this as well by using tslib. So what you do is you take all of this common shit and move it into a separate file so that it's not repeated between files, and it gets just reused within the file. So not a significant difference. The only reason the difference is there is because your JavaScript might not be supported by the JavaScript environment you're targeting. Same as Babel, JS to JS, size difference. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Baz. We're going to take a short 10-minute break and we'll get back into it. So go for the food. I want to talk a little bit about using Redux-saga to make testing a little bit easier. All right, give it up for David.
Hello everybody, you can hear me fine? Okay, cool. So I'm talking about Redux-saga, and specifically for the view of making testing easier. So there's a bunch of stuff you can do with Redux-saga. I'm not really going to get into it. I'm just going to talk about how it works underneath and why it's really good, because it makes testing a lot easier. So a little bit about me. I've been working with React for about 3 years. Before that, let's do a quick poll. So I assume everyone here uses React. So who is using Redux for your middleware? So that's almost everyone. And who's using Redux-thunk to do async? So it's about half of those. And how many people are using Redux-saga? So it's a little bit less, but yeah. And who knows what a generator function is? Okay, and a bit more than that. Yep. Okay, so yeah, so I've been working with React for about 3 years, and I think my sort of journey with React is probably pretty common, which is you start with React, and then you need some kind of state management, so you use Redux, and then you need to handle asynchronous stuff like API calls. And so the React Redux documentation is like, well, if you want to do this, use Redux-thunk, so the first thing they recommend. So you use Redux-thunk, and that works well enough. And then so I started a new role in November, and they were using Redux-saga, so I had to learn it. And then it does this one cool thing, so I thought I'd give a talk about it. So testing though. So testing should be easy. If it's easy, then developers will do it. And if your code's not easy to test, then the problem's with your code. The problem is not with your tests, right? So change your code to make testing easier. So the application I'm going to show you, we're just using one of these, so like a dummy online API. So it has users, posts, and to-dos, and so users have posts and to-dos. And the functionality we're doing a little bit of forking. So logic in the sense, so we'll fetch the user's posts, and if any of their posts start with velopdate, then we'll also fetch their to-dos. So it's a contrived example. The example I would give is say you had a team that were maintaining a blog, and then all of a sudden blog posts about a certain topic were out of date, and we were looking through which posts they'd done, then you'd also need to bring up their to-dos automatically. Let's show you the application, then we'll come back to this slide. So what I'm going to do for this talk is I'm going to show you how I would implement it using Redux-saga and how I would test it using Redux-saga, and then I'm going to talk about Redux-saga. So we'll just hit npm start. Okay, here we go. So it's pretty basic. So we click the user. Fetches them. I'm not doing anything with a loading cursor or anything, right? And then this guy, Irvin, one of his posts starts with veloptim, so we also fetched his to-dos, right? And I think, was it someone else, Curtis also, right? We go fetch his to-dos, righto. And then, this guy here doesn't have any, so we didn't fetch his to-dos. So let's look at how we would build this then. So this here's the thunk solution. So we'll jump into this guy first. So we've already got our users, map over them. When you click the user, then we do the select user. We do our map dispatch to props. Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, let's just talk a little bit about Redux-saga first, actually. Okay, so with Redux, we are going to dispatch actions, and actions are typically an object, and the way Redux-saga works is that you can also dispatch a function, and that function, the Redux-saga middleware will inject the dispatch function into it, so you can call dispatch from within your Redux, within your action, the function which we call a thunk, right? So let's just jump in to see what that guy here is. So select user. So we pass it an ID, and we're going to return a function. And you see the Redux middleware is the Redux-saga middleware is going to inject dispatch here, and then we call dispatch on that to dispatch this object. So that was when I selected a user. Let's just jump back to this slide. So this here is my Redux store structure. So we have a list of users, and then we have a list of posts, and those are indexed by the user ID. We have a list of to-dos that's also indexed by the user ID. We have our selected user with the ID, and that's how we know which posts to display or which to-dos to display. And then any errors we're just going to chuck there, right? Okay, so when I clicked to the user, then we dispatched that to set the user ID, and then we also want to fetch the posts for that user, right? So that's this guy here. We dispatch this thunk, and that there is going to call our API. I can just quickly click into that. Just straight up, we're using Axios to make our API call. Right, so we await it, we get the posts back, and once we've got the posts back, then we'll dispatch those to the reducer, and then we've got to look at the posts, and we've got this little function here. Post is special if the post title starts with velopdate. And if there are special posts, then we're going to go dispatch this function, which is going to go fetch the to-dos, right? So this function is pretty clean. I don't really see any problems with that. That's pretty straightforward. So let's look at how we would test this. And actually, we can just run our tests now. tests are failing. No, I'm expecting that. Okay, so let's look at a simple example first. So let me just close that. So fetch, okay, so we're not getting confused. Fetch to-dos is the easy one because we're just fetching the to-dos. There's none of that conditional logic at the end of it. So this was the simple one, right? And if we think about what we were doing, so when we create an action, when we create an action, one of these funcs, we're returning a function, then we're going to pass in the dispatch function, right? So one of the things we want to do is mock that dispatch function, and then we can test what things are happening against that. And then we're also going to just mock our API response because we don't want to actually be calling our API. Right, so here we go and create a fetch to-dos request with our mocked ID. Then we call that function and we pass our mocked dispatch in. And then when that guy runs, we expect that the API was called with the mocked ID. And then after that, right, we expect that the mock dispatch is going to have called this guy, which was that action that we sent. So that one was pretty straightforward. Let's look at the fetch posts for user. So this is a little bit more complicated because we have that whole special thing at the end that we also want to like mock that functionality and test the cases for that. Okay, so similarly, we're mocking dispatch, we are mocking the API, and here's my take one, right? So if any of the posts are special, then it's also going to fetch the to-dos. And all right, so that has special, we mock that, and we just make it return true, whatever we put in. We go and create our action with the mocked user ID. We call the action. We expect that was called. We expect that it went and did that. It's basically the same test as before. And oh no, this isn't working. Right, so let me just enter that down. Where are we? One more, yeah. Okay, so that there is failing. So take one, if they're special, and then is like expected the last one to be this, compared values have no visual difference. Oops. Okay, and the reason for this is, if we scroll down, I've got an example here. Right, so here we've just created a function, and then if I try compare them, that will pass, that's fine. This here is a function that returns a function, and that function is going to be the same, though it's going to fail, right? These two functions are not the same because they're sort of different bits of memory. Now there probably is, I probably could fix this, there's probably some like function equality, I don't know. So that's a problem. I could just sort of like, oh, well, okay, do that, you know, well, is it a function? But that's, whoops, sorry, like that, you know, just any function, whoops, where did we get to? But that's, yeah, that's not very good either. Oops, let me just, all right, that's a bit better. Okay, and then, so my take two, all right, let's try to do this a different way. But instead of actually calling, because what were we doing? We were trying to expect that this guy was called with this value. So instead of actually calling this, we could like try and mock that functionality. So what we're doing here is that we go and fetch the module, and then we have like this guy here, we mock that, right? Yeah, this isn't going to work. And the reason is because those two functions exist in the same module. So if I just jump in here quickly. So it's this function here, right, is calling this one up here. Those guys in the same in the same module, there's no way to actually to mock that. And that's like a whole nother talk. Yeah, so that doesn't work. And okay, so by this point, like, if you're looking at this and you're like, oh, what? Yeah, I mean, same. That's just not very fun. Yeah, I'm not having fun at this point. Like, this is, you know, writing that code to begin was a pain, and you know, so mocking modules are pain. There's a problem of equality between anonymous functions. You need to be aware of which functions are asynchronous. It's just not fun. So when I was like writing the code, I'd like, where are we? Spec. I'd forget to put that async in, and then we're like, oh, why isn't it working? It's just not fun. So there's a better way. There's Redux-saga. Okay, so what's Saga? What's Redux-saga? So Saga is a design pattern, and Redux-saga implements that design pattern, and it's designed for distributed transactions. So either if you've got a distributed database or you've got a bunch of microservices. So you've sort of got things going off all over the place, and you kind of, one of the things you want to do is be able to roll things back. That's sort of where it comes from. Redux-saga is an implementation of that pattern. The example, like when you Google it, this is the example that commonly comes up. So you're booking a holiday and you want to reserve a car, reserve a hotel, reserve a flight. Right, so those are on your 3 different microservices or something, and then something goes wrong on one of them. You know, so you go book holiday, right? You go do these 3 things, and then something goes wrong on one of those things, and you need a way to like kind of consolidate it back together. And then so the Saga pattern lets you do this sort of rollback where you cancel, so each action sort of has an opposite reaction kind of thing. But that's not what we're really here to talk about. That said, there is all of this cool functionality with Redux-saga that is actually pretty cool. There's a good reason to use it. But we're talking just about testing. Okay, so Redux-saga is useful because it has generator functions. So generator functions, it's this here with the star after the function, and then also the yield keyword. So those are a feature since ES 2015 with all of the other ES6 stuff. So when you call the function, then you're going to return a generator object. And that generator object has 3 functions. So it has a next, which lets you pass in a value, and it's going to return the next value that the generator gave you. Throw will let you like pass in an error and return whatever value the generator gave you, and return will basically just cancel the generator. All right, so let's go through generators. Where are we? Generators. And I am just going to, it's actually running just there. Okay, so all this is doing is just going to print them, and when we look at the code, you'll see that I've just added all of these outputs as comments, right? But yeah, if you want to run it yourself. Okay, so our first example, example 1, we've got our generator function that's accepting an argument, and then we've got yield, we've got this for loop, however many times, and then we've got a finish, right? So the first thing to be aware of is, okay, here we called the function, return the generator object. So what it is an object, right? It returns an object. And then we call this next function. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to yield this value, right? And then we call it again, and it's going to yield the value I, so that's 0. And then the loop comes around, calls 1, 2. Then the final one, yield fin. We're done false. And then if you try call next afterwards, you get value undefined, done true, right? So that's pretty simple. The next thing is demonstrating that you can pass in values into the next function. Now, when I was doing my practice of this, I was like, yeah, it's a little bit fiddly. You know, you just sort of got to kind of have a play to get your head around it. And then when and then got it round the wrong way. So we'll see if that happens this time. Okay, so what happens with these values? The first thing it does is it passes the value into the previous yield statement. and that's where it takes off. So with this one here, okay, you can see here, in all of these yields, I'm doing yield and I'm printing the value, right? So this time I've got my value in my generator function, and then I'm reassigning my value at each step, right? You see this one, the first time, my value is undefined because it was undefined here, right? So it yielded whatever this was, it was undefined at the time, right? Now the next one, B, so that's where the generator picks up, right? So we passed B in, it pops out here, is assigned to my value, start the for loop, and then the yield, right? And so this one is going to be 0B, right? It's the first iteration on the for loop, so it's 0 and B, because we just passed B in, popped out here, right? Loop, 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 loop. So on the fin, let's say fin is going to be E, which is the one we just called, right? And then, yeah, undefined. So that's passing values in. You can throw an error from a generator. So this one here, we just got to do the loop, and then we're going to throw an error. And what happens here is we've wrapped this in a try-catch. We go next, 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 and an error is encountered, and you catch it in here, right? And you can also pass an error into the generator function. So this time, we've got a try-catch inside the generator function. And what are we doing? We're going like next, next, and it's in the loop. But this time, we use the generator.throw and we pass an error in. So then that gets caught here, and then it's going to yield this guy, right? It's probably there, yeah. And then .return, that basically, you can see there, it just immediately cancels the generator. Right, so that's generators. And Redux-saga uses generators under the hood to do its stuff. Essentially what it's doing is, it's probably easier to look at the code. But it's making use of that concept where you can yield something up and then pass something back in, and so it can kind of step by step do your function, and that sort of makes things a lot easier in terms of mocking. Okay, so here, so basically I copy pasted the thunk solution, and now I refactored it into Saga. So we'll just go do. So you can see that this still works, right? So let's see how I've done that. So if we look in user list, so we're still dispatching the select user request, right? And in this case, what I've done is I have just reduced all of these to just plain objects again. We're not doing these curried functions, right? But now we have these sagas. Right, so the sagas, this stuff's boilerplate to just get Redux-saga listening. Actually, it's probably a good idea to look at the next slide. Okay, so Redux-sagas have 3 main effects. So take, at least for the purposes of this demo, so take is basically to say intercept these Redux actions and run the saga with it. Put, which is basically saying dispatch this action, and call, which is saying call this function. And these effects, all they do is create a plain JavaScript object. They don't actually do anything, but you yield them up to the Redux-saga middleware, and then the middleware decides what to do with it, and then does whatever, like makes the API call, and then once that promise has resolved, then it will then pass it into the next, and then your saga continues running. There's a caveat there. So Redux actions will still go to your reducers. So Redux-saga middleware doesn't stop things going to your reducers. They still go to your reducers. So the suggestion I have there is that you distinguish between actions that will trigger sagas and actions that will update the reducers. So you know, a request and then success objects or failure objects. So let's jump back to the code. Okay, so here, this is sort of a bit long form, but our watches, so these are our take everys, and that's just saying for this kind of action, go and fetch, go and use the saga to handle that action, right? So I think the one we want to look at is probably that one, right? And then it'll pass that action in, and then we go and grab the payload from the action, right? And you can see these are generator functions, right? And so the first thing we get here is this yield call, blah, 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 blah. So the point I want to make here is that this call, okay, you can see here, that is our API function, right? That's going to return a promise, and that's the argument we're passing to it, but we're not actually calling the API function there, we're just passing a reference to that function. We create this call object, and we yield that up to the Saga middleware. And I just want to point out that this is just an object. This call guy is just an object. There we go. That's what it looks like. I think that's the reference to the function. So what's going to happen here is that we've got this generator. We yield this up. That object goes up to Redux middleware, the Redux-saga middleware. The middleware resolves it, and then once that's done, then it's going to just pass the result of the API called here. We got our posts, and then we're going to go dispatch our success object, go set the posts, and then we want to see, well, were any of these posts special, so we do this call function. And if they were special, then we also want to go and fetch the to-dos, right? And so this logic isn't any different to the logic for the thunk. So what's that? Fetch post for user. So it's go fetch the posts, dispatch the success. Are there special posts? If so, dispatch the to-dos, right? So the logic is the same. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that if you wanted, if you wanted, you don't have to do this call thing. You could just actually call the API function, right? And that's going to return a promise, and you would yield a promise up to the Redux middleware, the Saga middleware, and that's going to handle that fine. This code will still work. Yeah, looks like it still works. But the reason that we wrap it in these call things is because it makes it heaps easier for testing. All right, so let's look at that. Just curious, maybe it wasn't actually working. I don't know, it looked like it. No, I don't reckon. Yeah. Oh, better actually though. Uncomment that. Sorry. There we go. There's my tests. Right, they're all working. All right, so let's look at these tests. And so what are we doing? Fetch posts for user, right? Okay, so in this case, what we're doing is we're going to create the generator object, which is our fetch post for user saga, right? And to do that, we pass in that action. The type doesn't matter because it was the take command that decided that this guy should run, but the payload matters, right? Here, this is going to be our mock API response. And then what we're expecting is that the first thing our generator is going to return is going to be one of these call objects to the API post to the user with this payload. And then, right, and then given here, we can inject the mocked API response, right, into the next function just here. And we're expecting that the result of that is that we're going to return one of these put statements, which was the dispatch the other guy. And then after that, we're expecting that it's going to call the has special post thing with this value. And then we're expecting, because we want to mock that behavior, so we're expecting the result of that function call to be true, or in this case we're making that the case. And we're expecting what to happen after that is that the fetch to-dos action is dispatched. And then after that, we're expecting it to be done. If there's not a special post, then down here, when we're expecting the response of the has special post call to be false, and then we're expecting that's done because it's done its thing. It's like, wow, that was so much easier. Like, none of that mocking stuff. Okay, so we're no longer doing any mocking of modules. We're just mocking the response of the previous step. All we're doing is testing object equality. And we no longer need to distinguish between async and synchronous code because the Redux-saga is handling that. And that's it. This code is on GitHub, so just clone it and have a play with it yourself. But any questions? All right, we can leave it there. Oh, no, there we go. So you're sort of thinking, could you like have something that's like an array of functions kind of thing, and just yeah. So did you see the problem I had trying to test that Redux thunk? Yeah, so that's sort of the reason. Just yeah, so testing should be easy. That's the main gist of so testing should be easy. If it's not easy, then you should change your code. Yeah. So by all means, if you can come up with an example, by all means clone it. Come up with an example that doesn't use Redux-saga that you can test, that does the exact same functionality. I'm all ears. Yeah. So yes, so the example, I haven't done this yet, but there's something that sort of I'm encountering at work is, so say you have your button, you're going to click the button and it's going to fetch something, but you only want it to, but you go click, 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 and you only want it to display the latest of those clicks, because if those are going at different speeds, then you get a race condition between those API responses. So I think Redux-saga with like the take latest, you go click, 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 it's going to kind of cancel those previous ones. Yeah. So there's things like that. There's a bunch of sort of functionality that it does give you, and it's really around if you're just doing like API calls that are then going to set something in state, it's probably okay. But when you start getting into sort of conditional logic as well, then sort of that's the kind of stuff I think it's useful for. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't have an opinion. I really have not touched context API. I mean, that's possibly, that would just solve everything as well. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So you would, like, I don't see any reason you would use both thunk and saga at the same time. And maybe, say you had like hundreds of thunks, then maybe you just turn them over one by one. But yeah, refactoring that was actually really simple. I can go over it. So you can see, these are my thunks, right? So when you're going to dispatch that whole thing, right? And instead, what I've done is I just converted that thing into, are we in the right one? I just converted these into plain request objects, and then we created sagas, watch the sagas, and then convert whatever logic that was into a saga. But the exact logic is basically the same. It's just call the API, dispatch this thing, right? So that's sort of line by line the same. So it's pretty simple. If you had weird other things going on, like you were accessing local storage within your saga or something, then yeah, you might have troubles, but yeah. All right, cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, David. Next up, we're going to have Chris. He's going to talk about making toast with hooks. Give it up for Chris.
I'm not the only one. Oh, is that not the right one? Sorry. All right, it's figuring it out. Cool. I can't see anything because I don't have my settings correct. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. Where's my display? Just go ahead and jump in. Cool. Hi. Hello. Hello. It's like break time. I mean, it may as well be break time. No, it's fine.
All right, just a little bit of quiet for Chris, please.
Settle down. Hi, I'm Chris. I am the founder and CTO of a company called Amplified AI. And I really like hooks. They're fun. Can I have some hands for who else is using hooks? Who else wants to use hooks? That's more. Who really doesn't want to use hooks and thinks that they're stupid? Ah, that's surprising. I thought there would be at least one. Did I miss anyone? No? Is anyone using them in production? Did anyone use them in production when they were in alpha because they're a glutton for punishment like me? No, okay. I'm a one-man dev team right now, and I'll talk later about the fact that we're hiring. But basically, I've been going at this since they were released. I got really excited. I really like functional programming and functional style programming, and I felt like I could have these stateless React functions and the components, and they would actually then be stateful, which is very cool. And you can read things top to bottom, left to right, and things are really cool. So I wanted to talk a little bit about hooks, and I built a little toast notification system with hooks. So let me see if I can get out of here. I'll show you what the end product looks like. It's really simple. I just say, cool, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to notify you with various like randomly quoted toast quotes. Some of them are good, some of them are not. They time out and disappear. So yeah, and this little bit of code on the right here is actually one of my favorite hooks that I've been using so far in production, which is an on-click outside hook, which I don't use for the toast, but I wanted to show you anyway because it's pretty sweet. We can talk through it a little bit later. We'll see what the time looks like. And in fact, while I mention that, I'm going to put this up here so that I can keep track of my own time and I don't go over. So today I'm just going to talk about making toast and doing this kind of toast notification system with React rather than with Bread. We'll talk about using the context API here. I'm using it because I don't want to just go through the whole process of doing Redux in a talk. But actually, I think it's useful. I think this is a good case for the context API. There are a few different cases that I think are really useful, like storing and looking after user data. And I think that a notification system like this is actually a really good case for the context API. And then, yeah, I'll talk to you a little bit about my journey into being cool with hooks. I was really excited about them, but at the same time, I was worried about them. I really am scared of magic. And they looked like magic initially, but they're actually not, which made me really, really happy. Okay, so what's a toast? Raise your hand if you use a toast notification system, if you've rolled your own. Anybody? Cool. I'm going to call on the people who roll their own. But basically, you guys all know what it is? Raise your hand. You can see it at the picture. It's basically when you are building an application and you need to inform the person who's using the application of something that's gone on. It's not super important, so you don't want to take up control of the screen, but you want to let them know. So you use a little toast notification. There's an example from our app. There's an example from Blueprint.js, and there's an example from Google up there with a sending message bit, move 6 files bit, all of that. Right. So what do you typically need to cook toast? You need a toaster, right? So, and this is the kind of underlying context of where we go with this, is that we need something to hold the toast and something to display the toast, and then we have to go and send like the things that are going to become toast to the thing that's holding toast, which then sends it to the things that's displaying the toast. So a couple of the kind of requirements here, right? So it needs to be visible above the rest of the app. No matter what's going on, you need to be able to show the toast. You need to be able to add and remove toast from anywhere in the component tree. And you need to potentially access the list of toasts from anywhere, although you're probably just going to get it from the one place. So yeah, cool. Create portal, really easy. I assume everyone here is pretty familiar with that. React 16, create portal. You can actually just throw what this renders into the top level of your application. But the whole idea is that it renders children into the DOM, into a DOM node that's outside of the DOM hierarchy of the parent. So in this case, we're just mapping over these toasts, which I've just given them content and an ID. And you can see that I'm using styled components. So I don't know, I might get some boos from some people and some excitement from other people, but I'm using styled components. I'm using React pose as well. So it's for styling and for animation. But you can just kind of see that we're mapping over the toasts there and displaying them above the rest of the DOM tree. Right, so the next requirement then is that we want to add and remove toasts from anywhere in the component tree. If you're using global state management, Redux, Mobex, whatever, this is the natural choice. In this case, I'm assuming that you're not. I'm assuming you're doing something else, doing something simple, or that you want to use the context API because you want to just confuse yourself and move your global state into multiple places. But yeah, I'm assuming that you're not in this case. And you know, we can get into the fact that Redux actually uses the context API, the experimental one, and Redux probably will eventually, pretty soon, start using hooks. You could use class components. You could just stick a class component at the top and do a bunch of prop drilling, but that makes me sad and I don't want to talk about it. Or you could use the context API, and so that's useful for what we're talking about here. And like I said, I think clearly defined use cases for simple global state are really great for the context API. Is anybody using context at all? One person is using context. 2 people, 3. Has anybody enjoyed using context? Yeah, it's good. You using render props? Using context? Do you like render props? Yeah, I like render props too until I started using hooks, and now I hate them. So yeah, you have to create with the context. If you're not using it, if you're not familiar with the API, I'll just say I'm really lucky in that I'm my own boss and I'm a one-man dev team, so I can just go and try things out and use some of the new APIs, which are awesome for the most part, but they also mean that I don't have to do a lot of the hard work that exists with having, you know, kind of legacy code and existing code bases and stuff like that. So anyway, you need a provider and you need a consumer. The provider goes somewhere high up in the tree, the component tree, and the consumer goes somewhere further down. And the idea is that you don't have to drill props from the provider to the consumer. Typically, when you're accessing as a consumer, you do some render props, which I've shown up here. Render prop pattern is pretty great. I use Apollo, which don't stone me for that either. But that's all render props, and it's pretty great. You've got this whole deal where you've got, you're basically just passing out returning a function, which is excellent, except that it just nests things really far in, and sometimes you have to try to nest multiple render prop situations within each other, which is really confusing in some cases. So I don't know, does anybody use Apollo? Okay. People who are using Apollo, have you tried to nest a mutation within a query? Or nest a query within another query? What's that? You just write a separate HOC and do that. Okay, that's fair enough. Do you find that is readable and useful?
More readable than embedding 3 layers of...
Yes, it is. Yeah, I'm with you. Absolutely. So this is one of the benefits of hooks, but we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, render props are cool, but they're messy. So you end up either writing HOCs. If you want to use context within a class component, you actually have to write an HOC. You have to pass the context as a prop. You can't. If you want to use it within a class component, if you want to use it in a lifecycle method. So if you want to pass it along in your render, that's fine. You can do your render prop there. But if you want to access it, and I don't know if you're looking at me like you might disagree, but if you want to access it in a lifecycle method, you have to pass it as a prop. So you have to kind of write these higher order components, and it just gets really, really messy. So you can use context. This is one of the new hooks, and I've given you an example here, which I'll show you the code for it. In fact, we can break out into it now. Use context is really great. You don't have to write a render prop. You just, at the top of your component, you just say, okay, let's define some of the stuff that we want from the context. And in this case, the context is returning an object. Some of the things in that object, for this example, are toasts and a dispatch function. Just because why not just use a reducer? But you've got toast and you've got dispatch, and you can just grab them at the top of your function and use them anywhere in your component. So I'll show you that in context. Let's see what we've got here. So we've got use toast here, which is a little, there we go. So yeah, in this case, I've actually written a higher order, or I've written a custom hook, but you can basically see it's very similar to the way that I'm using use toast here, where I'm saying, okay, so I want to grab this function, it's remove toast, I can use it anywhere else as I'm going instead of writing this render prop. Okay, let's see what we've got. So right, first thing we've got is use context. So we can, like I said, use context. So then the question is, what do we put into our context, right? So this is very simple. If we're thinking about the logic of this, it should hold the list of toasts, and it should have the capacity to add or remove toasts and offer that to anywhere else in the app, right? That's the whole point of using context. It's the whole point of, you want to use Redux for this situation, same thing. And so we've got this situation. We've got a toast context, and let me pull that up here. I've called it toast provider in this case, but it's using a couple of hooks here. We've got a use reducer, and basically what we've got is an initial state, which is just an empty array. We've got a reducer that's got a couple of potential actions that you can do on it. You can add, you can remove, you can reset. I'm kind of obsessive about immutability, so fine, I've got the little immutable bits here. But this is what we've got. And it's actually pretty simple. It's nice. One of the things that I want to do, and we'll see if we've got enough time. I don't know if we wanted to go over a little bit, but one of the things I'd love to do is actually talk to you guys about how we would replace this functionality without hooks. and kind of see what it looks like. So I don't know if you've read about hooks. A lot of what you see are where people will take something where they'll take their class components and they'll then move it into hooks. And there's a really nice kind of theme, or there's a really nice kind of narrative of, okay, cool, I've got all these lifecycle components, and now I've got this beautiful little set of just a couple of hooks. And it's very easy to see the benefits there. One of the things that I found really useful for understanding hooks was I was just going through and writing things with hooks, and then trying to refactor them back out into classes, and I got really frustrated. So we'll see if we can do some of that in just a moment. But I'm just going to run through this and get to the end of it. So the next thing, which I just showed you a moment ago, is use reducer. So again, you have this situation where you can just destructure an array. You've got your state, and then you've got your dispatcher. And so you use reducer. Reducer is the reducer function that I showed you a moment ago, and initial state is whatever your initial state is. So you then can access the state. You can pass it through your context, as I mentioned before, and you can access your dispatch function anywhere. So this is what useState is built on. If you guys have seen that, that's the most simple kind of hook, and it's effectively the same as setState in that you have a state and a setState function. Stop me at any point if I'm just kind of blowing over details, because I've been using it for a while, so I don't know if I am or not. Yeah, I like useReducer. I think it's more straightforward, but you could use useState for what I'm doing here. So then the last thing is that I want my toast to clear. I don't want them to just disappear after 3 seconds, 4 seconds. I don't want them to just sit up there in this little space, right? And I've got a set of max toasts as well. But yeah, it's nice if toasts disappear on their own. The toast should be able to call remove toast from the context after a set time, so it's doing a callback back up to the context. And this replaces a bunch of different lifecycle methods with just this 4 lines of code. And it's 4 lines of code just because Prettier says that it has to be. It could be whatever you want it to be. And the thought process here, what you'll see is, so you've got this use effect, and use effect is basically component did mount, component will unmount, component did update, like all those kinds of things rolled into one. And it's entirely declarative, and it's entirely read from left to right, top to bottom, okay? So if you throw use effect somewhere, and I'll show it to you in context because I think it's a little bit easier to see when you see things in context. Let's pull up the toast here. So this is my toast component. It's my little beautiful toast that I've got. And if you throw use effect in here, what I've got is I'm setting a timeout. And I'm saying that after whatever the amount of time is, I want to then dispatch this remove toast action up to my context. And so I'm just removing toast with the ID that's passed down. And then then I can return on this function as well. And when I return on this function, what that's replacing is component will unmount. So in this case, I'm clearing out the timeout. So yeah, all it is literally any time that this component renders, I'm setting a timeout for however long I've passed down. At the end of that timeout, I remove the toast, and I at the end, or when I'm about to unmount, I clear out that timer. And it works really well. And I don't have to write a class component. I don't have to write a bunch of junk, basically, from top to bottom. So then what I've done effectively is just I've added a convenience custom hook. This is the really big benefit for hooks, and what I've seen in production quite a bit is the ability to compose these together. So let's say you have, back at the beginning, like the on click outside, I have this hook it's reusable stateful logic that I can just pass anywhere. And I can actually pass it then to another hook, and I can pass it into another hook, and I can compose them together. I don't have to use recompose, and I don't have to try to like do all this kind of fudging with kind of makeshift functional React stuff. I can actually just compose them together and return whatever the output is. And and it's really, really simple. And so when you're looking at something like this, it's, you know, what, 10 lines of code maybe? But the logic that it replaces, if you were to go and write this as a set of class components, if you go and write these lifecycle methods, is huge. And it's like, one of the big things about this is like, it's really simple. You just read it top to bottom and it makes sense, right? Like, you know what's happening. And that makes me really, really happy because I often don't know what's happening when I'm reading a bunch of class components, and I'm like, what's gonna happen when this renders? What's gonna happen when this updates? I don't know. But yeah, it makes me happy as a developer. So yeah, I don't necessarily have to end it there. Do I have a minute or two longer? Okay, so what I want to do is I want to take, let's take this toast. I've got this use effect hook. And with this use effect hook, what I'm saying is, okay, so I've got this toast. After a certain amount of time, I wanted to dispatch up this remove toast to the context, and I want to clear the timeout when it's about to unmount. If you were to build this without hooks, what's the first thing that you would do? Anybody? What's that? You turn it into a class. Okay. So, do you want to do that? Let's do that. I don't know if I want to type it out. I'd rather talk it through because it's tedious for you guys to watch me type. And it's also embarrassing because I'm terrible. So you turn it into a class, right? And then what kind of lifecycle methods would you add? Component did mount. Okay. And what would you put in component did mount? Your set timeout. Okay, great. So your set timeout right there is calling something that's coming from a context. How are you going to get it to your lifecycle method? What's that? Local state. Okay, so local state, so you're gonna set state. What are you setting state to initially? So what I'm getting at is, I'm trying to access the context that I've created that's at the top of this component tree. I want to be able to access that context. So I might write a render prop, whatever, but how do I get it into the lifecycle component? What's that? This.context. Yeah? Does it access the context further up the DOM tree? You have to pass it in somehow, right? You have to pass it in as a prop. Anybody? You can get it from the constructor. Can you get context from the constructor? I didn't know you could do that, so cool. That answers actually, that makes my life easier. Yeah, I didn't know you could access context from the constructor. Is it just this.context in the constructor? It should be a prop? Okay, cool. So I don't have to write a higher order component. I thought I might have to write a higher order component, but we got there. So we've got the context. We're gonna bind it in the constructor, right? We're gonna be able to access it then in the other lifecycle methods. So, okay, we've got the context. So we've got this remove toast, or we've got a dispatch function, or whatever we've got in our context. So we've got component did mount, and when we have component did mount, then we're going to write this set timeout, and we're gonna pass it this thing that we've grabbed in the constructor, and we're gonna say, okay, so here's the function that you're gonna run when we run the timeout, right? And we're adding a whole bunch of this.props in various places so that we can destructure them if we want to and make it pretty. So then what do? We want to clear the timeout. Component will unmount, right? Okay. And again, you're going to clear the timeout for the thing that you've bound, right? And then within this little bit of rendering logic, this is all fine in a class component, but I do have a little close button in there that also then accesses the context. And I guess my question is just, yeah, which is easier to read and which is easier to understand? You're pointing at this. I don't know. Do you guys think that classes are more straightforward? No. See? So this is the thing. Like I said, I think that this is a lot clearer. A lot of people ask, like, what's wrong with classes? And if you come from an object-oriented background, like, they're gonna feel more natural to you for sure. But yeah, this gives you a much more concise and I think clear understanding of what's going on. So I'll call it there. Do you guys have any questions?
Correct me if I'm wrong. The problem that hooks are trying to solve is higher order components?
Yeah, so the question is, are hooks trying to solve higher order components?
Yes. And if I'm wrong, what is the thing that hooks is trying to solve?
So I think higher order components are one thing that hooks help with. They make them more concise, for sure. The whole concept of dealing with higher order components, it depends on why you're building a higher order component, right? And so if it's a matter of trying to pass down, like I mentioned before, a context, although apparently you can get it from the constructor, which I didn't realize, or if you're trying to do like a render prop pattern with another higher order component, yeah, it definitely solves that. But then, yeah, you then get into questions of composability, and I think that's where a big aspect of what hooks are trying to solve comes into play. In fact, the guy who wrote Recompose is now on, I think he's on React core team, but he's the one who was really pushing hooks, and in fact, he said he's embarrassed about Recompose now that he's got hooks out in the wild. So yeah, that's one thing, higher order components for sure. But it's mostly about being able to write stateless functional components where you actually bring in some form of state if you need to, and just reproducing that stateful logic when you're writing a bunch of different kind of stateless components. Anybody else? Go for it.
Well, one thing I find is a little bit ugly is that the fact that hooks are some sort of like semi-static methods that go into some basically singleton somewhere else.
Hmm.
You pick the stash, let's say, for this specific instance of component, and that feels not test-friendly somewhat.
You test them the same as you would test any other component.
Another question then.
Yeah.
Imagine Redux, how do they implement hooks, but how would that be much different from the HOC that they use?
It's not. It's just a little bit cleaner. That's all it is. It's literally just syntactic sugar at that point.
But then you just bring some of the Redux code from the outer HOC inside of the component itself.
Yeah, and you're reading the component from top to bottom in that case.
Now that when you do the test, you're not testing against this pure component. You actually have to do the mock of the Redux as well.
It depends on how you like organize your components for sure.
You want to wrap it in a component in the outer layer, a component that has the Redux on top of it, so you test it on the internal thing.
Yeah.
Then you're already introducing the sort of HOC thing.
For sure.
And it's kind of like, I'm not sure if it would be any good benefit for something like Redux.
So I think that you're right. I think the only benefit for something like Redux is syntactic sugar. I really think that's it. And it's the same for like Apollo, for example. I think it's just syntactic sugar in that you're going to be able to destructure, in Apollo, destructure loading error and data, right? Like that's it. There's no real difference between using the render prop in that case. The real benefit starts to come into play when you start thinking about how it works under the hood, and there's some of the stuff going on with React Fiber in that case. So hooks are great in that they're effectively creating a stack on React Fiber, and you know which fiber is actually dealing with this stack. And so there are some benefits under the hood, but not for the end user of Redux for sure. Go for it.
This comes on. You mentioned you were a bit afraid of hooks because they seem like magic, which basically seems what hooking sounds.
Yeah.
So, and then you said, but they're not, and then you said, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, so I saw this really simple API, and I was like, this looks like magic, right? It does. But when you actually like dig into it in the way that it's implemented, like I said before, it's basically just a stack on top of fibers, right? And you're just creating the stack, and you know which fiber it's on. It's entirely not magic. It's entirely just a set of function calls. And it's actually, if you are familiar with functional programming, what you're effectively doing is just taking your state and making it the set of arguments in your function calls, right? So it's calling one function after another, and it's passing along state as the arguments in those functions. And it's like throwing that down the stack effectively. So it is just a set of functions. That's all it is. It's just JavaScript, and it's just functions, and it's just a really nice API for dealing with it. Go for it.
Are there specific situations where you specifically shouldn't be using this?
I don't know of any with classes right now. If you have an existing code base with a bunch of classes, you probably shouldn't spend all your time refactoring into hooks, because I don't think that you're going to see performance benefits, not anytime soon for sure. Not that I've seen. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, error boundaries. That seems like that might be a good place. Although the kind of error boundary, like higher order component, you can just throw that in your functional components and it doesn't matter anymore. So you don't need to do component did catch in that sense. But you could like when you're creating your error boundary is what you mean. And yeah, that's probably a good example. Yeah. I don't know, to be honest. There might actually be a good way of doing it with hooks. They said it's coming. Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know. So that's actually a great example then. Yeah. Yeah, it is, and I'll put it onto. I went and got a $10 URL for hookedontoast.com. So I'll put it on there later, and then you can access the GitHub stuff on there. But it's on CI Grainger / I couldn't help it. Like it's really fun to play with like puns on toast and hooks. And it's a silly little toy site, but it's got the link to the GitHub, which is, yeah, it's not up there yet, but it will be later on. Please do. Yeah, it's CI Grainger is my GitHub account, so you can find it there too. Anything else? Yeah, that's what I've heard. I mean, in general, I think that the React core team is heading towards more optimizations for functional components. So minification is one of those things. They are looking to performance improvements as well. So I do think that this is, in the future, functional components and using hooks within functional components are going to be the way to go if you want to like take advantage of all the optimizations they're doing, for sure. But right now, yeah, minification is one side of that, for sure. Oh, in use effect, are you talking about the second argument? That array there is basically a component did update. So it's checking. You add the list of the props that you want to watch. It's just component did update. It literally just replaces that.
But I mean, do you know why they decided not to pass timeout into the function itself?
In
it does pass the arguments into the function that said timeout.
So timeout there, just because my naming may not be great, when I've got timeout there, it's literally just the length of time that it takes before it goes.
You know that name function called set timeout? Because you provide the arguments in the second parameter, it will actually put them down and inject them into the function, maybe. But they are not doing that here. They explicitly say, we're not passing this array of arguments into the function. So, for some reason, I don't know why, it felt more, would be more, I don't know.
I'm not sure that I'm following, but you yeah.
The timeout now is, what's it called, like a part of the closure.
Yeah.
But it's not an argument of the function.
The array that has timeout in it is absolutely an argument of the use effect function. And it's the array. It's actually the array of things that it watches for the component did update effectively.
It makes sense if they would pass it into the function itself, the first function, the first argument, which is the function. It would be an argument, and you can just use it from there.
I am not sure that I agree with that. I think the idea of having it as the second argument for the use effect is what adds the component did update functionality here. So you've got effectively component did mount. If you just did a simple use effect, passed a function as the first argument, and didn't return anything, you've got component did mount, right? You then pass a return So rather than returning null or whatever it is, or whatever you return then becomes component did unmount. And then the second argument is optional. And if you pass the second argument, then it's the props to watch effectively, whether component did update, whether you want to run this again.
My thing was that in theory, you could use the timeout. The function in use effect now is not strictly like you cannot extract this function and put it in a different file because the timeout is a thing that comes from the top. It's not a part of an argument list of the function. So you can just extract it and put it in a different file.
Why not?
It's bound because of it's a closure that depends on the timeout coming from the toast itself.
Sure, but that's to do with my own writing of this. Like I'd write like.
There's no way you can pass the timeout other way. You'll have to inline it inside of the toast. There's no way you can put it separate, run test against it separately. No.
I mean, yeah, you're talking about a prop that's specifically used for the toast. It's the amount of time that the toast lasts before it gets sent out. So, yeah, I think I don't see any reason to extract it out. You would just it's a prop that's explicitly for this component. So in that case, but you certainly could, like the whole use effect thing. In fact, using reusable kind of logic in terms of use effect. If you go and look at Dan Abramov's blog and go look at the bit that he wrote about making set interval declarative, he actually takes basically what I'm trying to do with use effect, and replaces set timeout with set interval. And when you do that, one of the things that you actually need to do is move the interval out into a ref. Because you lose track of the time, and the time gets lost effectively. So if you move it out into a ref, and you can make it effectively, you can make it declarative, right? So you can do a tick function and check and see if anything's changed since the last tick, and then you can make the interval entirely dynamic if you want to, which is fantastic. It's entirely declarative in that sense. So if you want to see an example of where it has been extracted out into a reusable function and a reusable set of logic like that, then go check out the post on Dan Abramov's blog, because he does it there with set interval. Yeah, no worries. Anybody else? Cool, thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So, announcements. If you're hiring or you want to talk about a little project you've been working on, please come up and form a line on the side here. If you do, please try and keep it quite short, like 30 seconds, 1 minute max.
Is the line on this side or on that side?
Anywhere over here. You're the first one, so you get to choose.
So hi, I'm Chris. I don't know if you guys know who I am. I founded and am the CTO of a company called Amplified AI, and we believe that the patent system is broken. I am actually an innovation economist, and I started the company because I think that the patent system is broken. I think that it's leading to people who have the biggest budgets, people who have kind of the most lawyer power, and not the people who have the best ideas, effectively. And so I am a machine learning person. I'm a data scientist, and that's what I was doing as an economist. And so founded this company to try to fix the patent system. The first thing that we're doing is releasing a prior art search that's based on machine learning. I can share some of our benchmarks if you want, but we're actually at a point where I feel like we're doing better than human quality with prior art search, and we're doing it in fractions of a second as opposed to several weeks. And we're doing it for a much lower cost, in fact free for small organizations. So I'm the only developer right now, aside from another guy who's doing some deep learning engineering, and we just closed the funding round, and we want to hire a bunch of people to make it so that I don't have to write React. I like it, but I want other people who are better at it than me to do it. So come talk to me if you're interested in writing a bunch of React and working on world-changing machine learning stuff. Thanks.
Right. Hi, I'm David. I gave a talk just before. The problem I'm trying to solve is I work as a contract developer, and I will typically just be shopped to one company, and I'm just one person in this in a team, and we sort of have to sort of fit in. It just doesn't seem like that effective sort of use. I think it would be much better to kind of go in as a team. And sort of you all have your tech stack that you work with and deliver a whole solution rather than kind of just one person and working with their existing processes. Especially with large enterprises, there's a lot of sort of dead wood and a lot of stuff to deal with. So basically I'm wanting to meet with other people who are contractors at sort of about the same sort of part in their career, and that's basically it. I'm probably going to go play pinball. There's a bar like 10 minutes away. It has really good pinball. So you will need to just catch me quickly. Or you can come play pinball with me as well. But yeah.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex from Red Wolf Roche. I just want to say a big thanks to Jake and also the Kogan lot for having us here, and food, and I don't know if any of you have set up a meetup before, but there's a lot that goes in from chairs, food, ice buckets, so thanks for having us, Jake. Cheers. Some of you might have seen my name on the meetup group. I get referred so I do recruitment. I get referred quite a lot because of the style I work, so just get to know people and network. And basically I get a lot of roles constantly in. So I'm working on like geospatial startups, work on contract gigs, so if people are interested, like more corporates. But yeah, like a whole heap of different roles. So if you want to get in contact or shoot an email if you're not confident to come up today, it's alex@redwolfroche.com.au, but come and say hello. Cheers.
Last one, I think. Okay, I'm Ellis. I'm from Marketplacer, where I build an online marketplace platform. And if South Melbourne, particularly this building, is convenient to you, then we're hiring because we're next door to Kogan. Not trying to poach or anything. But we got a lot of different technologies we work on: React, TypeScript, Ruby, many other things I can't remember right now, but if any, we're looking for all disciplines, be it front or back end, so if any of that interests you, come chat to me.
At Kogan, we're always looking for switched on people. If you're interested in working with React or perhaps Python, which is our back end, then come have a chat to me afterwards, or view like Kogan careers on Google. Anyway, until then, have a great night and thanks for coming.